Hello and welcome to our sixth video on our series on the effects of aggregate demand shocks on employment. In this video, we're going to be thinking about how to model a crisis, a recession, but when prices are flexible. Now, we don't really think that all prices are flexible, but this is going to be a very nice benchmark for us to understand what's happening in the economy. So now that we allow for the recession to hit the economy, we need to model what a recession means. And so each county is going to be affected with a different shock. This delta is going to be the shock to demand that we're going to experience. So delta is decreasing the demand of the economy. Remember, in normal times, demand was equal to 1. Now it's 1 minus delta C. And we're going to denote as delta bar the average size of the shock. This is going to come back later. Now what we're going to see is that the response of the economy depends on whether or not prices can adjust. Adjusting prices is important to avoid unemployment because as prices adjust, we can expand or contract different sectors to absorb the demand that's changing. Okay, let's see exactly how that's going to look. So the first thing to note is now the equilibrium is not symmetric because each county is going to be affected differently. Each county has its own demand shocks, and so some counties have large shocks, some counties have small shocks. But regardless of that, the no arbitrage condition for labor demand still implies that the relative prices have to be the same as in the original equilibrium we have. So the ratio of prices has to be equal to A over B, same as in our previous solution. Now from market clearing, we know how much labor has to be in each of the two sectors as a function of the demand shock in each of the counties. So what we're doing here is rather simple, but it does take a lot of steps. The first step is going to be to look at market clearing in the non-tradable sector. This is total output of non-tradable goods in County C equal to total consumption. Now, from the first order conditions of the consumer and the solution to the consumer problem, we know that total consumption demand is going to be alpha times the demand in that market over the price. But then, because we know that the prices have to satisfy the following equality, this is just manipulating this equality here, and we know that we need to clear the labor market, we can use this expression for the non-tradable labor to get an expression for the tradable labor. And the reason we want to get this expression is because now we can use the market clearing condition for tradable goods to get an expression for the tradable price. That's what we do here. And there are many steps involved, and I'm not gonna describe each of them now, but I'm basically giving you here what the main steps are. We start from the market clearing in the tradable sector. Then we're going to replace for both the supply of tradables in each county and the demand for tradables in each county. That's the second step. Now we know from our previous slide the value of the equilibrium level of employment in the tradable sector as a function of prices and the demand shock in each sector. Then the rest of the steps are just canceling and summing and realizing that the sum across all the demand shocks is equal to 1 minus delta bar being the average of these demand shock. And so this gives us a value for PT. Once we have this value for PT, we can use the relative price equation to get the value for the price in the non-tradable sector. Something very interesting happens here. Even though the value of the non-tradable sector price can be different across all counties, because all counties are going to have the same relative price of tradable to non-tradable, and the tradable price is going to be the same in all counties, then the non-tradable price also needs to be the same in all counties. Then we can use the two prices and the market clearing conditions to get the two expressions for non-tradable labor and tradable labor. And here we find what the main point is going to be. If you have a very large demand shock, that's going to decrease non-tradable sector heavily. You can see that the larger the demand shock, the larger delta C is, then the larger your non-tradable sector employment is gonna, the larger the decrease in the non-tradable sector employment is gonna be. The other thing we realize is that not only we have to take into account the size of the shock, but its size relative to the average shock. So even if we're all in a recession, if your county has a relatively mild shock, so that delta C is below average, then this ratio it's going to be above 1. And remember, in normal times, non-tradable employment is exactly equal to alpha. So if you have a relatively small delta C, then you're going to have higher non-tradable employment during the recession and lower tradable employment during the recession. If on the other hand you are a hard hit county, so your delta C is higher than average, then if delta C is higher than average, then this ratio is going to be less than 1. And so your non-tradable employment is going to go down. And so even though prices are flexible in this economy, we do recover the fact that sectors, counties who are hardest hit by the recession in demand, by the decrease in demand, also have the largest decreases in non-tradable employment. While counties who are not so hard hit by the decrease in demand are going to have lower changes and actually positive changes in non-tradable employment. Finally, we can use the fact that we know the labor to get with production at what the total amount of consumption is going to be of both non-tradable and tradable goods. And then we can replace on our market clearing conditions to get that nominal wages also have to be lower, but they are lower by the same fraction. So what have we learned? Well, there is going to be deflation in both the tradable and the non-tradable sector. Because there is less demand, lower prices are something we should expect. There is also going to be deflation in wages. So both wages and prices are going to be lower. And this decrease in wages is very important because it allows the economy to adapt to the lower demand and maintain full employment. We're going to see in the next video that when prices and wages are fixed, full employment cannot be guaranteed and there is going to be unemployment in the economy. Now, because of these decreases in prices, there is going to be a reallocation from the non-tradable to the tradable sector for those places, those counties that are hardest hit. So, excuse me, if delta C is very large, if it's larger than average, then the employment in the non-tradable sector is going to decrease. And the employment in the tradable sector is going to increase by the same amount, absorbing that additional employment. In counties where the demand shock is small, so it's lower than average, the opposite thing is going to happen. Non-tradable employment, it's going to go up, and then tradable employment is going to go down. The adjustment of prices is key to avoid unemployment. And even though that's happening, employment is going to fall in the non-tradable sector in the hardest hit areas, just as the evidence that we covered before told us. And it's going to fall more in counties with the larger drops in demand. So in the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at what the economy will look like if prices are fixed. We think of prices being fixed when we think about the short-term effect, so before people and firms can adapt.